Good evening, Western ACDA. I'm so excited to be here as a part of your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion virtual series. My name is Dr. Felicia Barber. I come to you from Westfield State University in Western Massachusetts. And this evening, I'm going to be presenting on the topic of inherent biases found in the choral music education program. So let's get started. So as I said, we'll be speaking from inherent biases found in choral music education. I want to start with an article, and I've supplied you with a handout, so hopefully this evening you'll be able to follow along, and hopefully also will look into some of the resources that I've provided as well at the end of the session. So we're going to start with an article that is in your packet again by Juliet Hess. And in the article, it discusses this issue of racism and this idea of dominance theory. Specifically, Gustafson in 2009 revealed that the curriculum held up what's called hegemony, or a leadership or dominance, especially of a specific country or social group. And in music education, we can see this. In the 1800s, of course, we know we have the traditional approach to vocal instruction through singing schools and singing masters going throughout the United States. We also, by the 1850s, have the upswing or the uptick of brass bands and instrumental music developing as well. And by the end of the 1800s, we see music education for the first time in the school curriculum. By 1890, we have a shift towards what we consider music appreciation or kind of a general music instruction as well. So 1890, again, at this time, we clearly see that the music of Black and also the music of Brown were left completely out of the curriculum. And I wanted you to just take a second and look at that picture. So what does that do when we have the music left out of the curriculum? It really has, right off the bat, we see exclusion. And we see where BIPOC community in large often has a hard time finding itself in music education or feeling like it's included in music education. By 1920s, we see that Black and Indigenous music was actually placed back in to the curriculum, but at this time it was considered as primitive or simple. Identified as simple, less complex. And we see here clearly that Eurocentric music, or as we often call it, Western music, was held to a higher degree and valued more in the curriculum. The music of Black and Indigenous as well was placed only in younger ages at this time. So we see again this hierarchy of dominance through the Western classical traditions being seen in our music curriculum, not only in 1890, but clearly even into the turn of the century. I went to an anti-racism session in April in Minnesota, and I'm swiping this right out of another presentation, but I thought it was very, very powerful. American holds onto an undemocratic assumption from its founding, that some people deserve more power than others. So this idea of hegemony goes right to our foundation. And not only in the United States, when we talk about systematic racism, which I'm going to get to a little bit more in depth later, but we can see this systematic racism even in the system of music education. And so even at its founding, through Black and Indigenous music or BIPOC music being left out of the curriculum, and then when it was brought back being classified as simple or less complex, we see that the value was placed on Western Europe or Eurocentric music, even at the beginning of our foundation. So continuing on, I want to talk a little bit about what's called a practice of dominant theory ideology. This still is what we've already been discussing, this idea that Western or Eurocentric ideas are a higher standard or higher value than other ideas. And students who do not conform to this paradigm also feel like they don't have any validation. They can't find a place. This affects more largely students of color who often will feel pushed out of the curriculum because they do not see their traditions of music making involved in our curriculum as we see it K through 12, as well as at the collegiate level. We can talk about, I can talk about from my own experience as an African American. I grew up singing by ear, playing piano and instruments by ear. The idea of the oral tradition is very strong in the African American community. It's also strong often in Hispanic communities and other communities, again, if we talk about the BIPOC communities. But those values were not, I didn't see a place for them when I got to music school. I didn't see a place for my improvisational skills. I didn't see a place for being able to pick up anything by ear automatically. It was going to the systems of Western traditions, and those skills were thought to be more valued. And so for right now, I want to take a second and have us look at an experience. This is a teacher from the Augusta, Georgia region. His name is Trey McLaughlin. He's a music educator by day. He also is a church musician on the weekends, and he has a semi-professional gospel ensemble as well. In this clip I'm going to share with you, he is actually working with a high school chorus in Jacksonville on a gospel piece, and he's teaching it in a rote tradition. And so I just want you to listen to this clip, and we'll discuss it on the other end. While you're listening, I want you to see how quickly you pick up the first time these segments as he introduces the alto part, the tenor part, and the soprano part. Let's listen in together.
So it'll be, and in fact, all of you sing. So it'll be. Just that much. 1, 2, ready, sing. Yes, that's good. It's very clean. Clean it up even more. Second up the phrase. There, ready, go. Ready, go. Got it? Whole phrase. Got it? 1, 2, ready, you try. Move it. Good. Do the soprano. You remember? All right, soprano and alto together. 1, 2, ready, and. Yes, good. Clean it up. Make it even more sure. Once again. 1, 2, ready, and. loud. Doesn't have to be full voice. I just want it nice and loud, all right? So you're gonna go, all right? So Martin, sing it for me. 1, 2, ready, and. You got it? Together. 1, 2, ready, and. Yeah, almost. Listen to them once more. 1, 2, ready, and. Now all together, and. Very good. All parts. 1, 2, ready, and.
All right, we're going to move on. And so how did you do? Hopefully you did well. I know for me, again, coming from that background, I wasn't even thinking about it the first time I was looking for a clip to place in this presentation, and the alto part, I heard it and I did it the first time. And so coming from this background, again, also my mother was a gospel piano player for our church, and I also worked a lot with the choir and sang with the choir since I was little. So picking up things by ear, again, I moved very quickly through that. So just going through again, going the other way here, by 1967, we can see now, moving on, that there was a shift now in our curriculum towards world music and multicultural music. And so non-Western music skills still were kept on the sidelines. And there's an article, again, that I referenced in the handout from 2009 that talks about how multicultural music education movement has been more, again, about diversity, and also has created this idea of music tourism rather than an understanding of musical and cultural practices. And so when we have this idea of tourism, I want to talk about that for just a minute. For many, many years, we had the, in the 1980s and 1990s, I'm going to use the African-American spiritual as an example. We had the revival of the African-American spiritual genre in choral classrooms, and with choral ensembles across the United States as well as the world. And for more often than not, it was used as an opener or a closer. And I think sometimes, even as educators, we can think, oh, this is our form of diversity. We put a spiritual, we programmed a spiritual and move on, but not really giving our students and our audiences the context surrounding the musical style, the genre, the practice, and the cultural experience that came from it. The spiritual, again, is usually used as a rousing closer when it came from such brokenness. And if we kind of talk about the context of the spiritual, how often it was used as a part of the Underground Railroad through songs of freedom, but came out of slavery and brokenness, then we may not program it the same. The same can be said for various world music, or this idea of, programming something from Brazil or programming something from China. If we're doing these things, we want to make sure that we get the original context and that we are not having this idea of tourism, but we're really giving our students the musical understanding and the cultural practice that surrounds the music that we're including in our repertoire program. Also, as part of this multicultural movement, I think we have to make sure that we recognize the racism that can occur, and that we are not afraid to name different issues, because when we don't identify things, then we can, or fail to address them, then it leads to more inequity. So now by 1967, we have all of these different terminologies. We have world music, and we have global music, and we have urban music, and we have multicultural music. But all we are really saying is this idea of us versus them. We are othering different styles of music by identifying or labeling the music. We have identified, because all we're really saying is non-Western European or non-classical style, or in the canon. We've got to be careful with the canon. We'll get back to that at another time. But we want to make sure that we're not creating this idea of us and them, and by labeling, that is what often occurs. So let's move on, because we don't have a lot of time this evening, but I want to talk about some really specific ideas that can be used in any kind of curriculum. But this idea of coded language, and how coded language just means language that makes us avoid direct terminology, okay? So it's a discomfort with direct language, with calling things exactly what they are. Coded language often will mask the actual issue that is happening in the discourse. So by us saying, you know, this is an urban piece, this is a global piece, this is a world music piece, this is a multicultural piece, this is non-Western, this is our diverse piece, we're really creating this idea of othering, and just saying really that it's non-Western European. So I want to take a second, and I hope that we have some comments that you share with us in the chat this evening. First of all, I want you to look at and have some self-reflection. What was your earliest memory of an experience with non-Western music in the classroom? I want you thinking K through 12. What was the earliest opportunity? Maybe it was an experience with African drumming. Maybe it was the first time you sang a piece in another language. Maybe it was a folk song that you learned, or a singing game that you learned in another language. But what was your earliest memory of an experience with non-Western music? And the second thing I'd like you to discuss in the chat this evening is, how have the perceived values on music of BIPOC cultures impacted our music education curriculum? How has it affected our actual curriculum? Not just K through 12. I'm going to challenge those of you who teach at the college level. How has it impacted the curriculum that we teach as well to our students? I hope to get some good feedback on that. All right, moving forward, I want to talk briefly about general perceptions. So we're going to start with perceptions on communities of color, and then move to how that can actually manifest itself in the actual classroom. And so here you see this picture in front of you, and what do you actually see? If you're looking through what they have labeled as white vision glasses, this African-American young man, instead of holding a phone, it appears that he's holding in the glasses a gun. Instead of holding drinking a soda in the glasses, it looks like it's some type of liquor or Colt 45 they have. And instead of having a basic backpack that might have education resources in it, it looks like it's a backpack full of crack or weed. So looking at and discussing perceptions. Perceptions are just the way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something that you have a mental impression of. Many times our perceptions often manifest themselves as stereotypes. And you know, some generalized stereotypes of students of color in the education system is that they can't achieve, or that they will misbehave, they're not interested. And so as teachers, we have to consider how our own biases can impact how we teach curriculum, what we teach, and how we teach it. I'm going to give you a really quick example of this. When I was in second grade, My mother went to a parent-teacher conference. I stood outside. I realized later that the person who was, quote unquote, the teacher actually didn't have an education degree, but was able to teach enrichment, which was kind of arts and crafts, to elementary students. So she went for the parent-teacher conference and was upset because I had received a D on my report card, and I had not had any project that received lower than a B. So she didn't know how the teacher got to that average. And I remember this as plain as day. I was outside in the hallway, as I said, and the teacher said, it doesn't matter what I give her. She's just going to end up like another little Black girl on the street having a bunch of babies. Perception. So her perception of the African American community was that they were of no value, that I was of no value. And that impacted not only what she taught, how she taught it, but also how she assessed. And I think that we have to be very careful as teachers too, thinking through some of the perceptions that we already have predetermined in our mind about our students in our classroom. Going to give you another example, and this one impacted me more as it falls in line with music education. Again, second grade wasn't, I guess, a great year for me. No, it was wonderful. But when I was 7, I wanted to learn how to play the piano. We had a piano in my house. It was so out of tune when I look back at it now. But I would play and pretend like I was playing all of these arpeggios on it. And my mother was a single parent. She had 6 children, and she was working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs. And so money was tight, but she found a way for me to be able to take a lesson. For whatever reason, I had heard the name Liberace and thought I needed to be the next Liberace. Didn't even know who Liberace was, but apparently he was good at piano. And so I went with it. So my mom got me a joint lesson with the lady in town who taught piano lessons. I was going to take lessons with Jenny Crane. Jenny Crane was Caucasian, and this is a symbol of me and Jenny Crane. So on the first day, I had my green book, the landscape with the piano here, and I and Jenny Crane went from my grandmother's house 3 doors down. We walked for our first piano lesson. And we were there, we both had 30-minute lesson, and we were kind of on either side of her at the piano. And when the lesson was done, the teacher asked Jenny Crane to head to the door, and she asked me to go into the parlor with her. And when I went into the parlor with her, she said, I can't teach you. And I didn't know what I had done wrong in an hour. And I wasn't sure what happened. I was asking her, is there something I could do? No, she said, your hands are just too small. And so I went to the door and I took Jenny Crane's hand again to go down to my grandmother's. And I realized that her hand and my hand were the same size. The only difference was the color of our skin. And so for me, this idea of access and this idea of racism and how it can manifest in perceptions and stereotypes, how it can manifest in the curriculum, in our teaching, really does impact students. I didn't have another piano lesson until I got to the university level. And Jenny Crane went on to have piano lessons all the way through and often played piano for me in high school at talent shows. And so there is this, the idea of perception and stereotypes, it really, really can impact not only our curriculum, but an individual student. So that's why I wanted to share that story with you. Let's talk briefly about microaggressions. And microaggressions are everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental snubs. They can be insults. They can be intentional or unintentional based on our own experiences. They will be derogatory and usually negative in their messaging, targeting specific people based solely on their marginalized group membership. And remember, these microaggressions can be based not only on culture, which I've been spending a lot of time this evening discussing, but it can be socioeconomic. It can be based on a disability, race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, identity, and sexual orientation, as well as religion. And so this is where we're getting to the implicit bias. That actually refers to the attitudes and or stereotypes that affect our understanding of actions and decisions in an unconscious manner. So implicit racial bias can help us to better understand the institutional, again, we're getting back to this institutional racism, and how it can affect our educational experiences of the students, especially those students in marginalized communities. So really quickly, I want to look at this idea of structural racism. And I have here an example just in general of how the biases or assumptions can bring themselves and manifest themselves as policies and practice, and then the outcomes become inequitable outcomes as well as racial disparities. And how can this happen, or how would this look in a music classroom? So I'm going to just kind of take some examples. Again, this idea that Eurocentric music is prioritized in the hierarchy can affect the practice. How did we see it affect the practice? From the very beginning, we saw that Black and Indigenous music was left out, excluded, and then when it was brought back, it was minimalized and or othered. And again, it leads to inequitable outcomes, specifically in the BIPOC community. I'm going to really quickly go to some examples of how we can see this in your actual classroom. I want you to imagine your classroom, and I want you to imagine these statements that I'm going to share with you, and picture in your mind who you think these students, or what these students would look like based on the statements that I'm going to read for you. So, a wonderful sight reader. They seem unengaged in learning classical literature. They started violin through Suzuki method. They struggle in music theory because of their background. They have great rhythm. They learn all of their music by ear. They love to sing gospel. They have not had private lessons before college. The AP class has paid off. They're going to test out of Music Theory 1. They want to audition with a pop song? So where can a bias appear in our curriculum? Let's take this, for instance. This is one of my favorite examples, and something that I constantly talk to people when I'm serving on boards about. All state auditions. You know it, you love it. I was a high school teacher in Tennessee prior to going back for my doctoral degree. But the all-state audition, you have students prepare a solo, at least in my experience, but oftentimes there is a separate section for sight reading, and sight reading example for students to pass and or score a certain rate, as well as the prepared solo. My question to you is, why is there sight reading as a part of the evaluation when once they get there, they do not have to sight read? Once they get there, the idea is that these are the best singers. So when we ask ourselves why our all-state choruses or ensembles look the same every year, how are we evaluating? And when we determine what has to be on the evaluation, is it exclusionary? What is it leaving out people of a certain community? If they can learn the song and they've learned it and have the best voice, should sight reading be a part of the evaluation? I'm sure this is going to start some kind of trauma or drama in the Western half. Okay, I'll read the chats later. Some other ways in which this can occur in K through 12 or college. Programming, again, not wanting to have this idea of a touristic view, not with 95% or more of our literature being from the classical repertoire, and we have one diversity piece, we have one piece from Brazil, or we did a spiritual, and so we've done our diversity for the year, thank you, and moving on. This idea of devaluing, again, or othering music of BIPOC experience can happen easily, K through 12 as well as college. I want to challenge us at the college curriculum. How do we expect to have diversity K through 12 when our curriculum at the collegiate level is still teaching a Eurocentric based repertoire, genres in our music theory, in our music history? Is it music history, or is it an evaluation of Western European music? Is it music theory, or is it a analysis of Western canon? These are the questions I'm asking. Okay, talk amongst yourself. Get back to me. And auditions. How do we audition? Do we? What skills are we valuing? Do we include sight reading? Do we include improvisation? Do we include oral skills as well in the preparation for evaluating students to be in our ensembles? What are we considering in our audition process? So I want us to kind of really think about this as a way of examining ourselves and our own unconscious bias. Some things that we can do to help to disrupt what we already have as biases is to stay informed, look at current research, learn again about behaviors, as well as being both culturally sensitive and aware of marginalized groups, acknowledge our own identity and how it will impact how we teach and relate to our students. Question the logic of racist, sexist, homophobic statements or questions, and open a dialogue and be willing to be uncomfortable. I know that some things even in this presentation may have made you uncomfortable, but being able to sit with them and also to discuss them is important as we're moving forward. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. And I'm going to move forward. Because of our time, I usually go on and discuss how we can foster diversity in the actual choral classroom, and specifically through examining the effects of diversity in our own classrooms, examining our own identity and biases, committing to educating and recruiting and preparing, really studying the performance practice of cultures, as well as performing and committing to performing literature of various backgrounds and groups. I think that that is really key, as well as this idea of preparation and this diversity of music. In your packets today, I actually included, I believe, 25 different musical resources for you and repertoire examples. And I didn't just base the diversity on race or culture again. It's based on region. We have some based on gender, and also based on topic, which we don't talk a lot about, just things that are topical. And so social justice, it could be current events. And so you'll see there a variety of diverse topics, as well as diverse composers, making sure that your students are aware that they're performing music by someone other than a white man in a white wig, or Mozart's cousin, uncle, or brother, and making sure that we are uplifting and upholding all of our diverse composers that are out. I think that that's important. The final thing I want to leave you with before I close this evening is this idea of self-examination and self-reflection. And so I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'll have you look at what's called an identity wheel. You already have this on your handout as well. But in the identity wheel, this is a home activity, and I'd love for you to be able to do this exercise as you leave this session this evening. First, we're asking you to put in the yellow here, this circle of 8, any personal identity traits. And you can see here, it gives you some examples. It could be your order of birth. You consider yourself what your talent is, a favorite type of music, hobbies, favorite movie genre. Any of those things you can put on the outside. In green, we're going to put how you identify yourself, the social identities, by race, ethnicity, class, sex, gender, religion, any of those things, and then your name in the center. And just to share briefly, my own results. I'm the youngest child. I love to sing. I love to travel. Identify as an African American. My pronouns are she and her, and religion, Christian. So disseminating this identity wheel, this is how I'd like to end. When you complete your homework for this evening, I'd like you to think on a few of these things. Which identity do you think about most for yourself? And which do you think about the least? Which of those identities that you identify on that wheel will give you the most privilege? And which puts you in a marginalized place? I want to skip down to point 4. What bias do you have against identities different than your own? In what ways could you identify in what ways can your identity impact the environment and the actual environment of your classroom that you create and the space that you create for your students or your ensembles? How does your own personal identity also impact how you teach the curriculum? If you have any questions or would like further information, please let me know. I have given you some additional resources at the end again. I also want to point out that ACDA does have a diversity national committee, and we're so excited to have Ariane Harley Emerson is our current chair. I have his email there if you'd like more information. NAFME also has information and a statement on diversity on their website. If you would like to actually email me and ask me any questions about this presentation, my information is here on the screen. Thank you so much. I appreciate, again, the invitation from Western ACDA, and it was an honor and a privilege to be with you this evening. Have a good night.